A lone woman was buried alive in the frozen mountains, blindfolded and left to freeze to death. Her enemies were setting up a camera to film the execution. But they made a mistake. They didn't count on the man who heard the call, a lone former SEAL operating against all reason. And he wasn't alone. He had his loyal K-9 partner. Together, they would tear this mountain apart to bring her home. The bustle of Jackson Hole was a memory, a noisy, temporary city of steel, dust, and diesel smoke left 2 days behind. Out here, the world was utterly silent. Caleb Donovan, known only as Cal to his former teammates, lay prone on a ridge of frozen shale. Cal was 40, though the Montana wind and a life of hard choices had carved deeper lines into his face. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. Beside him, just as still, was Riley. Riley was a 6-year-old German Shepherd, 90 pounds of muscle and loyalty wrapped in a sleek black and tan coat. His ears were radar dishes in constant, subtle rotation. They were alone. It was how Cal preferred it. The mission was simple: reconnaissance. Track a prize bull elk. Observe. Disconnect. No engagement. The air in the Beartooth Mountains was thin and bit at the lungs. Below them, a valley snaked through the peaks like a gray serpent. Nothing moved. Cal shifted his weight, a micro-movement. Riley's head snapped around, his dark eyes questioning. Cal gave a slow, single pat to his own chest. Stay. Riley let out a small puff of steam and settled, but his focus never wavered. This was their language, a silent liturgy developed over 4 years together. Cal was the mind. Riley was the senses. Cal pulled a high-protein ration bar from his vest. He broke off a piece and offered it. Riley took it gently. The fleeting warmth of the dog's mouth on his frozen glove was a small comfort. The cold was a physical weight. It was 5 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. The sky had a sickly, yellow tint. A storm was coming. This stillness wasn't peace. It was waiting. It came not like a storm, but an ambush. The wind arrived first, a low hiss that escalated to a full-throated roar in minutes. Then came the snow, not in flakes, but as a horizontal white wall of ice. Visibility dropped from 10 miles to 10 feet. Riley, to me, Cal bit out the words, his voice snatched by the wind. They scrambled down the scree slope for shelter. Riley found it. A rock overhang, less a cave than a scoop in the stone. They pressed themselves into it. The world beyond their small haven was a chaotic white void. Cal rigged a small thermal blanket, pulling it over them both. Riley pressed his body tight against Cal's side. The dog was a living furnace, and Cal huddled into him, the two of them a single, stubborn island against nature. In this forced isolation, the past always found him. The biting cold reminded him of the sterile chill of a hospital room. He closed his eyes. He didn't see the blizzard. He saw Emily. Emily, his wife, had been his opposite. She was warm sun, easy laughter, and the smell of coffee on a Sunday morning. She had hated his work, hated the silences, the long deployments, hated the man who left and the ghost that sometimes returned. But she had understood the part of him that needed the space, that needed the test. Then the sickness came. It was a slow, cruel insurgency that no amount of SEAL training could fight. He had sat by her bed, helpless, his large hands, so adept at violence and precision, unable to fix the one thing that mattered. He remembered her hand, thin and pale, in his. "Promise me, Cal," she'd whispered, her voice a rasp. "Just promise me you'll come home." She wasn't asking him to quit. She was asking him to live. "I always come home, Em." She'd tried to smile. "Good, because this one," she'd stroked Riley, who had kept his head on her bed for weeks. "He can't live without you." Emily had died 3 years ago. Since then, Cal had sought out every solo trek, every solitary hunt. He'd become the Reaper not because he was reckless, but because he was ruthlessly efficient, a ghost who accomplished his goal and vanished. He kept his promise to Emily by eliminating all risks. And the biggest risk he felt was other people. He couldn't lose anyone else. And he couldn't let anyone else lose him. Riley was different. Riley wasn't a risk. Riley was an extension of himself. The dog was his anchor, the one living thing that tied him to the memory of Emily. The radio crackled, static cutting through the wind's howl. It was tucked in his vest, but he felt the vibration. He pulled out the scanner, shielding it from the snow. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Sierra Victor 5, we are under fire." The voice was a woman's, professional but stretched thin by panic. "We'll call her the agent." "Roger that, Sheriff," Cal said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "Zero visibility, high winds, holding position." "Stand by, Reaper. We have a priority 1. The line was dead for a long moment, just the hiss of atmosphere. Then another voice cut in. It was a chaotic mess. Indistinct shouting, the unmistakable sound of gunfire, and then a signal struggling to live. Bravo team is down, the canyon, it's a cartel ambush, they've got Riley, they've got Agent Riley. She's been taken. The signal died, swallowed by the storm. Cal's blood ran cold. He knew of the DEA task force in the area. He knew their lead agent, Special Agent Kate Riley. A tough, smart woman. He'd nodded to her in a coffee shop in town. The sheriff's voice came back on the scanner, tinny and strained. All units, be advised, DEA task force ambushed at Grid 049. Storm has grounded all air support. I repeat, we have no air support. All local and federal personnel are to hold position until the storm breaks. It's a no-go. Cal felt his jaw lock. A no-go? That's the order, son. The sheriff's voice was unwavering. It's an impossible situation. Do not engage. You are to return to the main trailhead for extraction once the storm passes. Do you copy? This was the moment, the ethical razor's edge. His promise to Emily echoed in his ears. Promise me you'll come home. Retreat was survival. Retreat was keeping his word. To go after Riley was suicide. He would die, and Riley would die with him. He would fail his dying wife. But then he saw Kate Riley's face in his mind. He saw her in the snow, taken, alone. Cal looked down at Riley. The dog had lifted his head, sensing the tension, the shift in his handler. Riley's dark eyes were locked on Cal's. There was no fear in them, only trust, only readiness. The dog knew nothing of promises to the dead. He only knew the code they lived by. Cal keyed his own handheld radio, switching to an official channel. His voice was calm, steady. Roger that, Sheriff, returning to trailhead. Donovan out. He turned the radio off. He looked at Riley for a long, silent moment. The wind screamed, angry and violent. Cal pulled his thermal mask up. He checked the magazine in his rifle. He adjusted the straps on his pack. Riley stood, shaking the snow from his coat, ready. They think they know impossible, Cal whispered, more to himself than the dog. He put a gloved hand on Riley's head. We leave no one behind. Caleb Donovan, the man who wanted only to be left alone, stepped out from the shelter. He and his dog turned their backs on the safety of the trailhead and walked directly into the heart of the storm. Walking into the storm was like walking through a solid wall. The wind didn't just blow, it clawed and shoved, trying to tear Cal from the mountainside. Every step was a calculation. Every breath was a fight against the thin, freezing air. Riley moved ahead, head low, a dark shape in the driving white. His paws, protected by insulated booties, were surer than Cal's own boots. They had been walking for 2 hours. 2 hours of violating a direct advisory, 2 hours of chasing a ghost. Cal's mind was a fortress. He locked out the image of Emily, the doubt, the sheriff's angry voice. All that existed was the mission. He focused on the tiny blip on his GPS, the DEA team's last known coordinates. He and Riley communicated in their silent language. A raised hand from Cal and Riley would freeze, scanning the terrain. A low whine from Riley and Cal would halt, listening. The storm was their enemy, but also their cover. No one could see them. No one could hear them. They found the canyon by nearly falling into it. The ground simply dropped away, and they slid down a chute of snow and scree, landing in a deep drift at the bottom. The wind was quieter here, baffled by the high rock walls, and here, the silence was truly terrifying. The coordinates were precise. In the dim, gray light of the storm, the scene looked like a frozen photograph. 2 black SUVs, mangled and twisted, they were overturned, their armor plating ripped open by heavy caliber rounds. The fight had been fast and one-sided. Riley, watch, Cal whispered. The dog took up a position slightly elevated, his eyes scanning the ridges above for any lingering threats. Cal moved forward, rifle up, clearing the area in a tight circle. He moved from the wrecks to the surrounding boulders. He was a professional. First, clear the threat. Second, assess for survivors. There were none. The snow was disturbed, churned by boots and bodies, but the storm was already beginning to soften the sharp edges, to drape a shroud over the dark stains of blood. Cal did a quick, cold count. Bravo team was a 6-person unit. He found 4. He didn't allow himself to feel. Emotion was a luxury for later. He was the Reaper, and his job was to collect information. He began to look for Kate. He looked for tracks leading away from the ambush site. He found multiple sets, overlapping. The attackers. Heavy boots moving with purpose. He was looking for something else. A lighter print. Signs of a struggle. A drag mark. The wind was a cruel eraser. Every passing minute, the blizzard worked to bury the past. He found a place where a group had converged, then moved east, but the tracks were indistinct, fading. He followed them for 20 yards until the snow became a uniform white sheet. The trail was gone. He knelt, the cold seeping through his knee pads. The feeling of failure was a physical weight in his stomach. He'd come all this way, defied orders, risked Riley. For nothing. The trail was cold. Just then, the world shifted. We are no longer in the canyon with Cal. We are back a few moments in the past, in the chaos of the ambush. Special Agent Kate Riley, 30 years old, was a woman whose sharp intellect was her primary weapon. She was pinned behind the engine block of her burning SUV. Her rifle was hot. Her ears were ringing. Bravo 3, cover me. She yelled into her radio, getting only static. Bravo 2, report. Nothing. The air exploded next to her. She was alone. She fired her last 3 rounds. The metallic click of an empty magazine was the loudest sound in the world. A shadow fell over her. A man, huge and brutal, loomed above. But it wasn't this man who held her attention. It was the one beside him. This new man wasn't a thug. He was the fixer, a figure spoken of in whispers back at the field office. He was of average height, dressed in clean, functional gear, and his eyes were the color of cold steel. He looked at her not with anger, but with academic curiosity. He gave a short, clipped order in a language she didn't understand. Rough hands grabbed her, hauling her to her feet. They bound her wrists. She refused to scream. She looked the fixer in the eye, and he smiled, a thin, cruel slash of a smile. Agent Riley, he said, his English perfect. The one who sings. You will sing for me. They began to drag her away. She knew what capture meant. She knew she wasn't going to survive. But she was a federal agent. Her mind raced, searching for one last act, one final piece of defiance. As they pulled her past the body of her team leader, she stumbled. A deliberate act. Her right hand, though bound, managed to work its way into a tactical pouch on her vest. Her fingers closed around a small, heavy metal disc. It was her unit's challenge coin, a symbol of brotherhood, of belonging. No one left behind. With a sudden twist, as if falling again, she let it go. The coin made no sound as it hit the soft, fresh snow. She kicked a spray of white over it. One of the guards shoved her hard. She fell to her knees, then was hauled up again. The fixer watched her, his eyes narrowed, suspicious, but he saw nothing. They dragged her off, up the canyon, and into the storm. The world snapped back to Cal. He was still kneeling in the snow, the feeling of defeat washing over him. He had failed them. He had failed Emily. He was about to key his radio to report the trail lost when Riley, who had been casting back and forth, suddenly went rigid. The dog was stock still, head low, nose working the air just above the surface of the snow. He was 20 feet from Cal. He let out a low huff. Not a bark, not a growl. A sound of discovery. What is it, Riley? Cal said, moving slowly. Riley didn't look at him. He nosed a specific spot. He pawed at the snow once, twice, then looked at Cal, his tail giving a single, definitive thump. Here. Cal crawled over. The snow looked undisturbed, exactly like the rest of the canyon floor. Show me. Riley nudged the spot with his nose. Cal plunged his gloved hand into the snow. He felt nothing but ice. He dug deeper. His fingers brushed something small, flat, and hard. It wasn't a rock. He pulled it out. It was a small, round metal disc encased in ice. He held it in his palm. He rubbed the ice away with his thumb. The gray light of the storm caught on the raised metal. It was an eagle, an anchor, and a scale of justice, the insignia of her DEA unit. Cal stared at it. This wasn't a shell casing. This wasn't random debris. This was a challenge coin. You don't accidentally drop a challenge coin. You earn it. You protect it. It hadn't been dropped. It had been left. It was a breadcrumb, a signpost, a final, defiant message from the dark. Cal closed his fist around the cold metal. He stood up. The weight of failure was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The wind howled, but he didn't hear it anymore. He looked in the direction of the faded tracks. She was alive. She was smart. And she was a fighter. This was no longer a rescue mission for a generic Agent Riley. This was for Kate. Good boy, he whispered to Riley, who was already sending the ground, catching the new direction. Find her, Riley. Find her. The challenge coin was a cold, hard weight in Cal's hand. It was a piece of metal, but it felt like a living thing, a transmission of will. Riley was already moving, his nose skimming the surface of the snow, no longer casting about but following a line. The scent was faint, diluted by the storm, but the coin had anchored it. Riley was on Kate's ghost trail. Cal followed. They moved in a tactical rhythm. Riley would move 30 yards, then pause, testing the air. Cal would provide overwatch, his rifle sweeping the gray void before he moved up to join. The storm was their cloak, but it was also a labyrinth. It deadened sound, distorted distance, and played tricks on the eyes. Every rock looked like a man. Every gust of wind sounded like a shout. They climbed out of the canyon, up a narrow, ice-slicked game trail. Riley didn't tire. He was in his element, his entire being focused on the one complex task Cal had given him: find. After another hour, the terrain changed. They crested a ridge and the wind lessened, blocked by a massive wall of black rock. Riley slowed. He dropped low, his belly to the snow. Cal instantly did the same. He unslung his rifle, flipping open the scope caps. Riley led him to a cluster of boulders at the edge of a small depression, almost a natural amphitheater. The place was shielded from the worst of the winds, and it was occupied. Cal tucked himself behind the largest boulder, pulling the binoculars from his vest. He focused them, his breath catching, a painful stitch in his chest. There were 5 of them, 5 men in mismatched cold weather gear and armed with Kalashnikovs. 3 were huddled around a small, smoky fire. The shooters. They were just shapes, trying to stay warm. The 4th, the cameraman, was setting up a small video camera on a tripod, his actions fussy and impatient. And the 5th, the brute leader, was huge and broad, his beard caked with ice, and he paced back and forth, barking orders. But it wasn't the men that held Cal's attention. It was the figure at the center of the depression. At first, he couldn't process what he was seeing. It looked like a head, disembodied, resting on the snow. He refocused, his heart hammering. It was Kate. Special Agent Kate Riley. She was buried. They had buried her in the snow up to her neck, packing the ice around her to hold her fast. Her head was exposed to the elements. Her face was a deathly pale, her lips tinged with blue. A strip of black cloth was tied tightly around her eyes, blinding her. Cal switched from his binoculars to his rifle scope, the magnification bringing her closer. He could see her shivering, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that shook her entire head. She was dying of exposure. The world went silent for Cal. There was no wind, no mission, no promise to Emily. There was only a cold, pure rage. This wasn't war. This was cruelty. Then, his focus shifted. We are inside Kate's mind. The world was black and cold. The cold was a living animal, gnawing at her. She could no longer feel her legs, or her arms, or her body. There was just a numb, heavy weight below her neck. Her fear was a physical thing, a ball of ice in her throat. But she was a federal agent. She pushed the fear down. She focused on her training. Control your breathing. Slow your heart rate. Do not panic. The brute leader yelled something nearby. She flinched. She didn't know what they wanted. They had dragged her here. And the fixer, the one with the cold eyes, had left her with these men, saying, "The world must see." She was terrified, but she would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. She would not beg. She had one thing left, one thing they couldn't take, and that was her dignity. She held her head high, her chin up, facing her unseen enemies. And in the cold blackness of her mind, she began to speak their names. Mike, Bravo 2, was gone. Jason, Bravo 3, was gone. Chris, Bravo 4, was gone. She recited the names of her fallen team, a silent eulogy, a mantra to keep the madness at bay. From his perch, Cal watched her. He saw the shivers, but he also saw the defiance. He saw the tilt of her chin. He saw the hard set of her jaw. She wasn't a victim waiting to die. She was a soldier facing it. The respect he'd felt finding the coin now solidified into a hard, unbreakable admiration. She was one of them. She was one of his. The brute leader kicked snow near her head. He barked an order at the cameraman, who was fumbling with a lens. The leader stepped in front of the tripod, puffing out his chest. The cameraman gave a thumbs up. A small red light on the camera blinked on. They were recording. To the agents of the DEA, the leader began, his voice a low growl, his English thick with hatred. You send your soldiers into our country. You even send your women. He gestured dramatically at Kate. We send you a message. He pulled a long, curved knife from a sheath at his side. The steel flashed in the gray light. This one, he pointed the knife at Kate, is a warrior of your corrupt nation. She will see no more sunrises. We will execute this female invader at the first light of dawn. The video will be a warning to you all. This is our justice. He finished his speech and spit into the snow. He stalked back to the fire, leaving the camera to continue recording Kate's slow, shivering death. Cal's mind snapped back into focus. The countdown wasn't just the cold. It was the dawn. Dawn was maybe 3, maybe 4 hours away. But Kate wouldn't last that long. The cold would kill her first. He couldn't wait. He analyzed the problem. 5 targets, 1 hostage. He was one man with 1 dog. The shooters by the fire were clustered together. The cameraman was fiddling with his gear. The leader was arrogant. His back was to the high ground. Cal lowered his rifle and looked at Riley. The dog was trembling, not from cold, but from controlled energy. He felt his handler's tension. He was a coiled spring, waiting for release. Cal made a slow, deliberate hand signal. Stay. Watch. Riley locked his gaze on the men in the depression. Cal pulled the challenge coin from his pocket. He looked at the piece of metal, then at the shivering, blindfolded woman in the snow. She had done her part. She had left him the trail. She was still fighting. Now it was his turn. The world had shrunk to the 10-yard depression and the 5 men who held it. Cal's mind was a cold machine processing variables. Wind speed, target distance, predictable movements. The leader and 2 of his shooters were clustered by the fire, their backs to him, distracted by the warmth. The cameraman was kneeling by his tripod, packing gear away. And the 5th man, the sentry, was pacing a short 30-foot beat right between Cal's position and Kate. The sentry was the key. He was the only one who was alert, but he was also the most dangerous. A suppressed shot could drift in the wind, and the sound of a body hitting the hard-packed snow would be loud. A knife was impossible at this range. This was a job for Riley. Cal flattened himself, his breath fogging in front of his face. He pulled Riley close, the dog's warmth a solid presence. He rested a hand on Riley's back, feeling the readiness, the coiled power. Riley, he whispered, the sound barely audible. The dog's ears twitched. Cal gave the hand signals, a silent, precise language. First, a flat palm moving low. Crawl. Then, he pointed 2 fingers at his own eyes, then at the sentry. Watch him. Finally, he made a soft closing motion with his hand. Silent takedown. Riley understood. The dog detached from Cal, a seamless shadow breaking off from a larger one. He went so low his belly was in the snow and began to move. He didn't look like a dog. He looked like a predator, using every depression, every patch of shadow, moving only when the wind gusted. His discipline was absolute, a testament to years of training. He was a living weapon, aimed and fired by Cal's will. Cal shifted his own position, sliding down the embankment for a clearer angle. He settled his scope. The sentry was Riley's. The cameraman was his. The 3 by the fire would be last. He waited. Riley was now a dark patch 20 feet from the sentry, perfectly still, waiting for the signal. The sentry stopped. He turned his back on Riley, looking out into the storm. It was the moment. Cal gave a short, sharp whistle, a signal lost on the wind to everyone but Riley. The dog exploded. He covered the 20 feet in less than a second, a blur of dark fur. There was no bark, no growl. He hit the sentry's back, his jaws locking onto the base of the man's neck. The man's rifle clattered on the ice. He made one choked, gurgling sound, and Riley used his weight to pull him backward, disappearing with him behind a snowdrift. It was over in 3 seconds. Simultaneously, as Riley launched, Cal's finger squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle made a dry thump. The cameraman, kneeling by his tripod, stiffened, then slumped forward over his gear without a sound. 2 down, the 3 men by the fire were oblivious. One of them laughed, a dry, cracking sound. Cal was already moving. He didn't run. He moved in a low, fast crouch. Rifle up, closing the 50 yards to Kate. Riley materialized at his side, his muzzle clean, his eyes bright and focused, ready for the next command. Good boy, Cal breathed. He reached Kate. She flinched, hearing the crunch of his boots. She had no idea what was happening. She was blindfolded, buried, and had just heard her executioner speak. She was prepared for the end. Cal knelt beside her. Stay calm, he said, his voice low and steady. He pulled the knife from his vest. He didn't dig. He went for the blindfold first. With one quick, upward slice, he severed the black cloth. Kate's eyes flew open. They were wide, wild, and an astonishing blue, rimmed with the horror of someone who has been facing death in the dark. They darted frantically before locking on his face, inches from hers. She saw the snow-caked goggles, the frost on his mask, but she saw his eyes, steady, focused, alive. He saw her. He saw the ice on her eyelashes. He saw the fear, but under it, he saw a spark of something else, pure, unadulterated astonishment, mixed with a flicker of defiant will. "Agent Riley," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion but resolve. "My name is Cal. I'm getting you home." For a second, she just stared as if he were a hallucination. Then her chapped, blue lips parted. She tried to speak, but only a gasp came out. "Hang on," he said. He had no time for sentiment. He plunged the point of his combat knife into the hard-packed ice and snow around her shoulders. He began to pry it away in large chunks. It was hard as concrete. This would take time he didn't have. He worked with a frantic, focused energy, stabbing, twisting, pulling. He was so focused on her, on the ice, that he didn't hear the small noise from the fire. But Riley did. Riley let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated through Cal's chest. Cal dropped the knife and spun, bringing his rifle up in a single motion. The leader was standing, head turned, eyes narrowed. He'd heard the growl. He shouted, a questioning, angry sound. He saw the bodies of the sentry and the cameraman. He saw Cal kneeling over Kate. The leader roared, a sound of pure rage. He raised his AK-47. Time slowed. Cal knew he couldn't fire. He was too close to Kate. The muzzle blast alone would injure her. He had to move, but the leader was faster. He opened fire. The world erupted in noise. The deafening crack 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 of the unsuppressed automatic rifle echoed off the rock walls. Bullets chewed the air over Cal's head, kicking up shards of ice and snow into his face. The element of surprise was gone. The silent rescue was a failure. Cal lunged forward, shielding Kate's head and shoulders with his own body, his armor plates taking the brunt of the sharp ice fragments. "Riley, engage!" he roared. Riley launched himself at the three men by the fire. Cal, shielding Kate with his left side, twisted and brought his rifle up, aiming at the leader. The depression turned into a chaotic swirl of gunfire. The world erupted in a maelstrom of noise and ice. The leader's automatic fire was deafening, tearing through the air where Cal's head had just been. Cal rolled, covering Kate's face with his armored chest. Ice chips kicked up by the bullet stung his neck. He couldn't stay here. He was a shield, but a static one. "Riley, engage!" he had roared. Riley was a blur of loyal fury. He didn't go for the leader who was firing. He went for the support. He launched himself at the two shooters who were scrambling for their rifles by the fire. The dog moved with predatory grace, a silent blur that became a 90-pound missile. He slammed into the first man's knees, sending him sprawling into the fire's embers. The second man brought his rifle up, but Riley was on him, jaws locking onto his gun arm, shaking his head with a ferocity that threw the man's aim skyward. It was the opening Cal needed. He rolled off Kate, twisted, and fired 3 controlled shots from his suppressed rifle. Thump, thump, thump. The leader, surprised by the lack of muzzle flash, grunted as the rounds impacted the rock near his head. He ducked for cover, silenced for a moment. "Kate!" Cal yelled, grabbing the front of her vest. He went back to the ice, stabbing and prying. "Can you move your legs?" She was lucid, her eyes wide with adrenaline. She tried. "Nothing. No, I can't. I can't feel them," she gasped, panic rising in her voice. There was no time to dig. The leader was reloading. The other shooter was fighting with Riley. "This is gonna hurt," Cal stated. He jammed his knife into the ice for leverage, grabbed her vest with both hands, and pulled. He roared with the effort, muscles straining. Kate screamed. It was a sharp, terrible sound as the frozen, cast-like snow tore away. Her body was ripped from the ground. She was free, but she collapsed in the snow, a dead weight. "Up. We have to move." Cal hauled her to her feet. Her legs buckled immediately. They were blocks of ice, useless. The leader popped up and fired again. Cal wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her entire body into his side, half carrying, half dragging her. "Riley, to me, heel." Riley disengaged from the man he was fighting, leaving him clutching a mangled arm, and sprinted back, taking up a position at Cal's left. The three of them began a desperate, stumbling retreat toward the high ground. "You're not getting away," the leader roared, stepping out from his cover. Cal didn't look back. He fired blindly behind him, forcing the leader to pause. He pulled Kate behind a large boulder, the first real piece of cover. They collapsed behind it, gasping, in agony. The air burned. Kate was shivering violently, her body racked with spasms, but her eyes were clear. She was fighting the shock. She grabbed Cal's arm. Her voice was a broken whisper. "The leader, the big one, he," She was struggling for breath. He has a radio. I saw it on his vest, a satellite phone. He's going to call for help. Cal froze. He looked down at her. She was in agony, freezing to death. And her first instinct was to provide tactical intelligence. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't cargo. She was an agent. Copy, Cal said. A single word loaded with a respect he rarely gave. He looked at Riley. Watch our six. Riley took up a position at the edge of the boulder, a low growl in his chest, his eyes fixed on the depression. We're going up the ridge the way I came. It's our only chance, Cal said. He pulled her up again. The movement was agonizing. They were slow. Too slow. They moved from boulder to boulder. Cal would pull Kate, set her down, then provide covering fire while Riley guarded their flank. Behind them, they heard the leader shouting. He was coming, and he had one man with him, the shooter Riley had knocked into the fire, now recovered. They reached a narrow cleft in the rock, a shortcut up the ridge. It was just wide enough for one person. Cal shoved Kate through ahead of him. Crawl if you have to. He turned to cover their retreat. He saw the leader raise his rifle. Cal fired and the leader ducked. It came from the side. The shooter Riley had engaged, the one with the mangled arm, wasn't as injured as he looked. He had gone quiet, circled around them, and waited. He burst from the shadows, not for Cal, who was armored and facing the other way, but for Kate. He had a knife, and his good arm was raised, the blade arcing down for her spine. Cal saw the movement too late. He shouted, a wordless sound of horror. He wasn't fast enough. But Riley was. Riley had been guarding their six. He saw the threat at the same instant Cal did. He didn't hesitate. He threw his body, a 90-pound projectile, directly into the path of the knife. He wasn't trying to engage the man. He was trying to shield Kate. The knife, meant for Kate's spine, plunged deep into the thick muscle of Riley's left shoulder. Riley yelped in pain, a sound that tore through Cal's soul, but the dog didn't back down. The pain triggered a deeper, primal rage. Riley ignored the blade buried in his shoulder and twisted in midair, his jaws locking on the attacker's throat. He tore the man backward and they went down in the snow in a flurry of violent motion. Cal was already turning. One precise shot. The fight was over. There was a moment of deafening silence. The storm itself seemed to hold its breath. Cal, Kate whispered. Cal scrambled to her, are you hit? Are you okay? But she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Riley. The dog had disentangled himself. He was standing on 3 legs, the 4th held off the ground, blood pumping from a deep, ugly wound in his shoulder, staining the snow red. He looked at Cal, whined softly, but held his ground. Riley, Cal breathed, his heart breaking. He's hit. He's bleeding, Cal. He's bleeding, Kate cried. It wasn't a whisper. It was a raw, horrified sound. She forgot her own pain, her own frozen legs. She started dragging herself through the snow, crawling, trying to get to the wounded dog. He saved me. He saved me. Cal stared, stunned. She was dying, and her only thought was for his dog. A shout from the depression broke the spell. The leader was still coming. Cal grabbed Kate, pulling her back. He's okay. He's a warrior. He heaved her up, this time in a fireman's carry, ignoring the screaming protest in his own back. Adrenaline surged. Riley, with me. The dog limped, but he moved, taking up his position at Cal's heel. Cal didn't look back. He plunged into the whiteout of the storm, carrying Kate, his wounded dog at his side. They were all broken. They were all freezing. But they were together. He ran. There was no tactic, no finesse. Just a burning in his lungs and the dead weight of Kate on his shoulders. The fireman's carry was efficient, but brutal. Every step was a jarring impact. Behind him, he could hear the 3-legged thump-thump-thump of Riley, forcing himself to keep up. The dog's breathing was a pained wheeze, but he never fell behind. The storm was a white wall. It was their enemy, but also their salvation. It swallowed the sound of their flight. It blinded the leader whose angry shouts grew fainter and fainter, lost in the wind's howl. Cal pushed up the ridge, his thighs screaming. He was operating on a level beyond exhaustion, fueled by pure, cold adrenaline. He didn't know where he was going. He just moved up, away from the threat. He stumbled, a knee cracking against a sharp rock, and nearly dropped Kate. He grunted, shifting her weight. Cal, she whispered, her voice faint against his back. Is he? Riley. He's with us, Cal said definitively. We're okay. It was a lie. They were not okay. Riley was bleeding out. Kate was freezing to death. And he was lost. Just as he felt his own strength beginning to fail, Riley pushed past him. The dog, despite his wounded shoulder, forged ahead a few yards and stopped, nosing at a sheer wall of ice and snow. He whined, a high, urgent sound, and began pawing at a drift, looking back at Cal. "What is it, boy?" Riley pawed again, more urgently. Cal shifted Kate, letting her slide down his back until she was standing, leaning against him. She couldn't hold her own weight, but she was upright. He moved to where Riley was, rifle ready. Behind the drift was a fissure, a dark crack in the rock no wider than a man's shoulders. It was a cave or a den. It was shelter. Inside, he told Kate. He half pushed, half lowered her into the darkness. She tumbled in. Riley scrambled after. Cal slid in last, rifle pointed back until the last possible second. He slid down a short, icy slope and landed in a space of absolute blackness and sudden, shocking silence. The wind was gone, its roar muffled to a distant moan. The cave was small, barely big enough for the three of them. It smelled of wet rock and earth, but it was out of the storm. For a moment, they just breathed. The only sound was 3 sets of ragged, desperate gasps. Cal's training took over. Triage. He fumbled for his headlamp, switching it on. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating their tiny sanctuary. He went to Riley first. "Let me see, boy." The dog had laid down on his side, his injured shoulder up. The fur on his front was dark and matted. Cal gently parted the fur. The knife wound was clean but deep, still oozing blood. "You're lucky, Riley," Cal murmured. It missed the artery. His hands, though numb with cold, were steady. He pulled out his medical kit. He cleaned the wound with an alcohol wipe, Riley flinching only once. He packed the gash with a hemostatic agent, then dressed it with a thick gauze pad, wrapping it tightly around the dog's shoulder and chest. Riley licked his hand, a rough, warm tongue on his frozen skin. "Good boy. Done." He switched off the headlamp to save the battery and turned his attention to Kate. In the pitch black, he could hear her. Her teeth were chattering, a fast, desperate, and terrifying click-click-click in the small space. "Kate," he said, his voice calm, clinical. "I'm so cold," she stuttered. "I know. You're severely hypothermic. We don't have much time." He took a breath. "I have to get your wet clothes off you, right now. It's the only way you're going to survive." There was a pause. He could hear her try to take a breath. "Okay." He switched the headlamp back on, but he aimed the beam at the ceiling of the cave, illuminating the space in a dim, indirect glow. He moved to her, his movements all business. "This will be fast. Don't think about it." He was a professional. He was a medic. He was not a man. He was a machine focused on a task. He used his knife to cut away her torn, frozen tactical vest. He stripped off her gear. Then he went for her base layers. They were soaked with sweat and melted snow. "This is the killer," he said. He kept his eyes on his hands. He cut her thermal shirt up the middle and peeled it off her shoulders. He cut her pants away. He worked with a dispassionate efficiency, his mind focused on seams and fabric. He never looked at her. He was saving a life, not invading a privacy. He pulled his own spare, dry thermal set from his pack. It was his last dry thing. "Arms up." She tried, but they were shaking too hard. He gently worked her arms into the sleeves as if dressing a child. He pulled the dry pants on, his movements swift and impersonal. "Okay, done." He pulled his single sleeping bag from his pack. "Get in." He helped her slide into the high-tech bag, and he zipped it to her chin. He sat back on his heels. Her chattering slowed, but it didn't stop. He watched her for a full minute. She was still shivering violently. The dry clothes and the bag weren't enough. Her core temperature was too low. She was losing the fight. Her eyes, visible in the dim light, were half closed. "Cal," she whispered, her voice thin as a thread. "Still cold." He knew what was happening. Her body was shutting down. He looked at Riley. The dog was watching him, his head up despite his injury. Cal's mind flashed on his promise to Emily. Come home. This was a new test. He was cold. He was wet. But he was a furnace compared to her. He could get in the bag. It was standard procedure, skin-to-skin contact. But in the darkness, in this tiny space after what she'd been through, he hesitated. It felt wrong. It felt like a violation. Then he looked at Riley again. 90 pounds of fur and muscle, a living furnace. He made his decision. He unzipped the bag. Kate looked at him, confused. "Riley," Cal said, his voice firm. The dog's ears went up. "Come on, get in." Riley looked at him, confused. He whined. "That's an order," Cal said, his voice dropping to a command tone he rarely used. He pointed to the space next to Kate. "Warm." The dog understood that word. It was part of his Arctic training. He carefully, painfully, got to his 3 good feet. He stepped into the open bag and crawled in, snuggling until he was pressed against Kate's entire body. He turned a tight circle and lay down, his back pressed against her front. He let out a long, low groan. Kate let out a sharp, ragged breath as the sudden, intense animal heat hit her. She was so cold her instincts took over. She didn't question it. She turned, curling her own body into the dog's, burying her frozen face in the thick fur of his neck. She wrapped her arms around him. Cal zipped the bag up, enclosing them both. Her teeth stopped chattering. After a long minute, a small, muffled voice came from inside the bag. "Thanks, Riley." Cal switched off the headlamp. The cave plunged back into darkness. He took up a position at the entrance, his back to them, his rifle across his lap. He was the sentry. He was wet. He was freezing. He would not sleep. But behind him, in the dark, he could hear Kate's breathing deepen, evening out. And under it, the low, steady thump-thump of his dog's heart. He had made his choice. They were his team, and they were alive. Cal did not sleep. He sat guard at the mouth of the cave, a block of ice himself, his rifle a heavier block of steel on his lap. He was cold, a deep, bone-aching cold. But behind him, there was warmth. The slow, even breathing of Kate had merged with the deeper, rhythmic breathing of Riley. Her teeth had stopped chattering. That was all that mattered. Hours passed in the darkness. Finally, the relentless howl of the wind began to soften, its roar fading to a weak moan. A faint gray light began to creep into the cave's entrance. "Dawn." He turned. "Kate." Her voice was thick, muffled by Riley's fur. "I'm awake. We have to move, the storm's breaking. That means our friend can move, too." He switched on his headlamp. The light illuminated a small, exhausted family. Kate slowly disentangled herself from Riley. The dog got up painfully, shaking off snow and fur. He looked at Cal, his tail giving a weak thump. "How you doing, boy?" Cal said, checking the dog's bandaged shoulder. The dressing had held. The bleeding had stopped. "You, Agent?" he asked, his tone all business, though his eyes were checking her for signs of frostbite. Kate sat up, her face pale but her eyes clear. "I can feel my feet," she said, her voice hoarse. She wiggled her toes in the boots he'd put back on for her. "Pins and needles, but I can feel them." "Good. That's a miracle. Pain is good. Means they're alive." He pulled the last of his supplies from his pack. 1 protein bar, a half canteen of water. He broke the bar in 3, giving the largest piece to Kate, 1 to Riley, and the smallest to himself. He handed Kate the water. "Drink all of it." She hesitated, looking at him. "Cal." "That's an order, Agent," he said, leaving no room for argument. She drank. They crawled out of the cave into a new world. The storm was gone, leaving behind a landscape of blinding white under a deep, aching blue sky. The beauty was dangerous, offering no cover. Their extraction point was on the map, 2 clicks north. The journey was a slow, brutal agony. Kate could walk, but barely. Her legs were shaky, her balance gone. Cal put her arm over his shoulder, and they moved as one, half walking, half stumbling. Riley, limping heavily, took the lead, nose working, head constantly turning, protecting them even in his own pain. After an hour, they reached the coordinates. Cal stopped, his heart sinking. The map was right. This was the location, but it was on the far side of a chasm. A huge, sheer canyon split the mountain. It was at least 200 feet across, and its bottom was lost in shadow thousands of feet below. The only way across was a bridge. It wasn't a bridge. It was a joke. A few rotten wooden planks, some missing entirely, strung together by 2 frayed-looking ropes that swayed and groaned in the high-altitude wind. Kate made a choked sound. She took one look down into the abyss and recoiled, her whole body rigid. "No, I can't." Cal looked at her. Her face, so determined, was now bleached with a different kind of terror. "I can't, Cal," she whispered, her eyes glued to the chasm. "I have a thing with heights. I can't do it." Cal held up a hand. "Okay, it's okay." He was firm but calm. He didn't push. He waited for her to meet his eyes. "Kate, look at me." She tore her gaze from the abyss and locked it on his. "Don't look down," he said, his voice low. It was an order and a promise. The bridge will hold us. It was built for yaks. It can hold you. He gestured to Riley. The dog, sensing her fear, had already limped onto the first few planks. He looked back, whining softly. You have two choices, Cal said. You can look at the center of my pack, or you can look at Riley. That's it. Trust me. Trust Riley. We go one step at a time. We don't stop until we're on the other side. Her breathing was rapid. Cal. One step at a time. He turned and stepped onto the bridge. It swayed violently. I go first. You're in the middle. Riley watches our six. She swallowed, nodded, and put her hands on his pack. Okay. Okay. Riley fell in behind her. They moved. Step, plank, creak, sway. The wind whistled through the canyon, a mournful, empty sound. The bridge was a living monster, groaning under their feet. Cal kept up a steady, low patter. Good. That's it. One more. Good. Don't look down. Riley's right behind you. You're doing great, Kate. They were halfway across. The swaying was at its worst. A shout. Cal froze. It came from the far side. The side they were walking toward. The brute leader. He was standing 20 yards from the end of the bridge, rifle raised. He was alone, his face a mask of fury. Cal. Kate cried. Another shout from behind them. Cal glanced back to the bank they had just left. The other shooter, the one Riley had fought by the fire, was standing, rifle also raised. They were trapped on a creaking bridge, suspended thousands of feet in the air with an enemy at both ends. The leader on the far side grinned, a horrible, triumphant smile. He raised his rifle, taking careful aim. There was no time, no cover, no escape. Cal's mind went cold. He did the math, and this was the end. Get down. He roared. He shoved Kate, pressing her flat against the swaying planks. Riley, down. He tore his last block of C4 from his vest. A brick of explosive, a detonator. His promise to Emily flashed in his mind. I always come home. It was a promise he had to break. He slapped the C4 onto the main suspension rope, his frozen fingers fumbling with the detonator cap. The leader in front was advancing onto the bridge, firing. Crack, crack. Bullets splintered the wooden planks, zinging past Cal's head. Kate, crawl. Go, go. He yelled. But she was frozen, pinned by the fire. He was out of time. He was trying to seat the cap. The leader was 10 yards away, raising his rifle for the final shot. Riley. Cal yelled. But Riley already saw. He saw the leader. He saw the gun. He saw his handler exposed. With a roar of pure, wounded fury, Riley launched himself. He ignored his injured shoulder and sprinted across the swaying planks, a black and tan missile. He didn't go for the throat. He slammed his 90-pound body directly into the leader's rifle and chest. The leader grunted in surprise, his shot going wide. He lost his balance, struggling to fight off the dog and aim at the same time. It was the opening. It was the 2 seconds Cal needed. The cap clicked into place. Armed. Riley, heel. Cal screamed, his voice raw. Riley disengaged from the leader and scrambled back, limping, bleeding. Cal looked at Kate, who was staring in horror. There was no time to run. Jump. He roared. He didn't wait. He grabbed the front of Kate's vest, hauling her up. He grabbed Riley's harness with his other hand, and with one final, desperate roar, he pulled them both with him, launching the three of them off the side of the bridge. He hit the detonator in midair. For one long, silent second. They were falling. Then the world exploded. The C4 detonated with a deafening crack. The bridge cables snapped. The entire structure, planks, ropes, and both shooters, vaporized in a cloud of splinters and fire. They hit a deep snowdrift on a ledge just below the far cliff. The impact was brutal, knocking the wind out of Cal. His ears rang. The sky was full of falling debris. He lay stunned, his vision blurry. He was on top of Kate. Riley was on top of him. He pushed himself up. He was alive. He looked at Kate. She was coughing, but her eyes were open. He looked at Riley. The dog was trembling, but he was on all 4 feet. They were alive. They were on the right side of the chasm. They had made it. The silence after the explosion was deafening. A fine powder of snow and rock dust rained down on them. Cal's ears rang with a high, metallic whine. He was lying in a deep snowdrift on a narrow ledge, Kate's body beneath his, Riley's heavy form pressed over them both. He gently pushed the dog off. Riley, you good? The dog shook his entire body, sending out a spray of snow, and gave one sharp bark. He was alive. Kate. Cal rolled off her, every muscle screaming in protest. She was coughing, her eyes wide with shock, but she was in one piece. The drift had saved them. He looked up. The chasm was an open wound. The bridge was gone. The enemy was gone. "We're alive," she whispered, her voice full of disbelief. "Yeah," Cal said, his tone flat. But they weren't safe. They were still exposed. He looked at the ledge. It was a dead end. The extraction point was still above them, on the main cliffside. "We have to climb." The final climb was the worst. It was only 40 feet, but it was a sheer wall of rock and ice. It took them nearly an hour. Cal went first, finding handholds. Then he looped a short length of rope under Kate's arms and hauled her up, his muscles burning with the last of his strength. He pulled Riley up last, the dog scrabbling, his injured leg useless. They collapsed on the top of the ridge. The extraction point. It was a wide, flat stretch of wind-scoured rock, and before them, the world opened up. The storm had broken. The sky was a deep, bruised blue, turning to violet and fiery orange on the eastern horizon. The sun was rising. It crested the jagged peaks of the Beartooths, spilling golden light across a sea of white mountains. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing Cal had ever seen. It was a beauty that didn't care. It illuminated their blood, their pain, their survival. They stood there, the three of them, silhouettes against the dawn. They were broken. Cal was running on fumes, his promise to Emily a thin, frayed thread. Riley stood on 3 legs, his head low, exhausted. And Kate. The adrenaline was gone. The fight for survival was over. The cold, the pain, and the memory all came rushing back at once. She looked at the sunrise, and her face, pale and frostbitten, crumpled. "They should have seen this," she whispered. Her voice broke. She wasn't talking about the enemy. She was talking about Bravo Team. Mike, Jason, Chris. She sank to her knees, the tough, defiant agent who had faced down her executioners, who had crossed a chasm, finally broke. She buried her face in her gloves and began to cry. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a series of silent, racking sobs that shook her entire frame. She wasn't crying from fear or pain. She was crying for the ones who weren't there. For the guilt of being the only one to see this sunrise. Cal stood helpless. This was an enemy he couldn't fight. This was a wound he couldn't dress. He was the Reaper, a man of action, of silent movements and hard choices. He didn't know how to fix this. His instinct was to give her space, to turn away and scan the perimeter. He thought of Emily in the hospital. He had been just as useless then, a large, quiet man in a room full of pain he couldn't touch. But he didn't turn away. Not this time. He looked at Riley. The dog, despite his own pain, limped forward. He nudged his big, furry head under Kate's elbow, forcing her hands from her face. He gave her a soft, insistent nudge and whined low in his throat. "I am here." Kate's hands came away from her face and clenched in the dog's fur, grounding herself in the simple, loyal warmth. Riley had done his part. Now it was Cal's turn. He moved, his own movement stiff and awkward. He sat down on the frozen rock, not too close, but close enough to be a presence. He said nothing. He had no words of comfort. Words would be a lie. Instead, he did the only thing he could. He reached out his gloved hand and put it on her shoulder. He just left it there, a solid, unmoving weight. A simple physical statement. "You are not alone." She leaned into the touch, just slightly. And in the silence of the new morning, the three of them sat together. The grieving agent, the wounded dog, and the man who had kept his promise. A new sound joined the wind. It was small at first, a beat, a rhythm felt in the chest more than heard by the ears. Whump. 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 Cal's head snapped up. His hand tightened on Kate's shoulder. Riley's ears flattened, then perked. "You hear that?" Cal whispered. Kate looked up, her face streaked with frozen tears. She listened. The sound grew, echoing off the canyon walls. Whump, whump, whump. A black shape appeared against the rising sun. A Black Hawk helicopter. Cal fumbled for his radio, his hand shaking for the first time. He didn't need to. The radio on his vest crackled to life. "Reaper, this is Angel 1. Good to see you. We have you visual." The chopper circled, its rotor wash a glorious, violent wind, blasting them with snow. The side door was open. A pararescue jumper, PJ, was in the doorway, masked, his eyes professional and kind. "We'll call him Tex." He gave the thumbs down signal. The hoist began to descend. "Heard you ran into some trouble, Reaper," Tex's voice came over the radio. "Looks like you made a friend." They were hoisted up one by one. Riley first in a special harness, then Kate clipped to the medic, then Cal. He collapsed onto the floor of the chopper. The noise was overwhelming. The side door slid shut and the world outside disappeared. A medic, a young man with focused eyes, was already at work. He cut away Kate's clothes, shouting, "Hypothermia. Get me warm saline." He wrapped her in thermal blankets. He turned to Riley, checking the dressing, prepping a new one. Cal pulled off his helmet, its weight suddenly unbearable. He leaned his head against the cold metal bulkhead, and for the first time in 3 years, he closed his eyes. He felt a touch. He opened them. Kate was being strapped to a litter, but she was looking at him. She was pale. Her lips were cracked, but her eyes were clear. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She just looked at him. He gave a single, small nod. Riley, his shoulder newly dressed, limped over. He was too tired to stand. He collapsed on the floor, his body wedged between Cal's boots and Kate's litter. The dog let out a long, deep sigh. The sound of a job done. He rested his head on Cal's knee. Then, as if to make sure, he lifted one heavy paw and placed it on Kate's hand. The Blackhawk banked hard, turning its nose toward the sun. They were going home.